can maintain our bodies, how we can use our body's natural ability and some pharmacological advancements to heal and regenerate when we have an injury or a wound. So what I want to focus on today is two main ideas. First, that there's many different cell types in our bodies, and especially in our skin, that have to communicate and work together in order to repair damage. And secondly, that we have cells in our adult bodies called stem cells that allow us to regenerate new tissue throughout our lifespan. So I want to start out by going over how normal wound healing proceeds in the skin. So the first stage after you get a cut or a scrape on your skin is that the wound will bleed, and sticky blood cells from the blood vessels will bind together to create a clot to stop the bleeding. Next, these sticky blood cells will send signals to the rest of your body to recruit immune cells to start cleaning up the wound. And these are called macrophages, and they're kind of like your body's Pac-Man cells. And they can engulf any germs or dead cells or debris that have entered the wound, eat them, digest them, and remove them so that they can't infect your body. And then and these cells will also be recruited from the bloodstream and will start to form a scab. The next stage is to rebuild the skin, and here, instead of immune cells, we're looking at just the ordinary skin cells that are found throughout your skin that will start to divide and create more cells and more proteins to fill this empty space. Once this empty space is filled, new blood vessels, like Brooks was just talking about, will start to grow into that space in order to carry nutrients and other needed particles into the wound. And then finally, we want the skin to go back to normal. So after all of these extra skin cells have divided and filled up this space, we want to prune them back so that we only have the normal amount of blood vessels and new skin cells in that area. And while all of these stages of wound healing are vital to repairing your skin, what's really important is the transitions between these stages. So your body needs to get the correct signals to go from stopping bleeding to the immune response to rebuilding and then returning to normal. And one of the ways this can go awry is when the rebuilding phase just continues. And this is where we can see scarring. So in this case, we see, as in the last slide, we have these new skin cells and these new blood vessels growing, but if they don't get the right signals, they'll just continue to grow and create this mass of tissue that can really impair mobility, impair organ function, and be a real problem for quality of life in patients. So in the medical field, we really want to make sure that all of these stages of wound healing proceed as normal so that we have normal healing. So one of the ways we can do this is with growth signals. So these you can just apply in a cream, and these will be the signals that the cells need to receive in order to progress to the next stage of wound healing. It's sort of like if the first set of cells isn't making the right phone call, we can just send a robocall to the next stage to get it to start activating. If this doesn't work, we can use a slightly more involved procedure called a skin substitute. So here it's sort of like a bandage, but it will have cells already embedded in it, and these cells can cooperate and communicate with your native cells in order to keep wound healing on track. However, if these less invasive routes don't work, we can do several different types of grafts. The most common is a skin graft, where it's pretty much what it sounds like. You would take skin from one part of the body or from a donor, and then you can extend it to cover a larger wound, and then these skin cells and associated other cell types will help your native cells to repair the wound normally. There are a lot of issues with this procedure. I mean, you can tell just thinking about it that this causes another wound that might also have trouble healing. And it's an invasive surgery, it can cause a painful wound, and it's something that we really want to avoid. So an alternative we can use is a fat graft. And this is oftentimes used in a lot of plastic surgeries to make sure that those wounds heal correctly. And so here you'll take some of the fat deposits, again, from the patient or from a donor, and it's in a much easier procedure, kind of really similar to liposuction, which people get electively a lot of the time. So in this case, you'll take this fat tissue from the patient, and then what we're really after isn't these fat cells that Brooks talked about, but rather within the fat tissue, we have these stem cells. And these can be really valuable to help wound healing proceed as normal. So what do I mean by stem cells? These are a special type of cell that we have throughout our lifetime, and they have two really important traits. The first is that a stem cell will keep dividing and reproducing pretty much throughout your entire lifetime. Most of the cells in your body will divide a few times, but then stop and just perform a function for the rest of their life. A stem cell will keep dividing indefinitely and make more and more cells. The second trait that they have is that when they're dividing and making new cells, these can be of multiple different types. Usually a cell divides and makes two identical copies of itself. With a stem cell, you could have another stem cell or a skin cell or an immune cell and reproduce and repopulate several different populations that way. As I said, these adult stem cells exist throughout your lifetime in many different tissues and organs in your body. So if we look at the tissues in your body by the amount of stem cells they have, some of our tissues are full of stem cells and are highly regenerative. So these are things like your skin and your blood that you keep replacing throughout your lifetime over and over again. There's some tissues that have a few stem cells and have a limited ability to regenerate, like the bone and the muscle that Brooks was talking about, where you can't necessarily make new fat cells on demand, but you can after several years. And then finally, there's some tissues that have very few or no stem cells at all, and these are things like the heart and the brain. And this is why in these tissues it's really concerning if you get an injury, because it's hard for your body to repair because there are fewer stem cells in these tissues. So looking at this, it seems like having adult stem cells in your tissues is great because it allows you to heal and regenerate. But there is, unfortunately, a downside, which you can see if you overlay the tissues that are the most common to develop cancer. And here we see the mammary gland, the gut, and the skin. All are these highly regenerative tissues. And one theory that explains this is that stem cells, with their advanced ability to continue dividing and regenerating, are really prone to the kinds of mutations and problems that cause uncontrolled growth. Because they're able to grow so effectively, they can quickly become out of control and cause cancer. So one of the main challenges in maintaining the human body is how do we have enough regenerative potential to heal without risking cancer. And so to sum up the first part of my talk, I just want to go back and look at these different cell types that I talked about. We have the blood cells that cause a clot to stop bleeding and communicate with these immune cells, these macrophages, which clean out the wound. Then blood vessels and skin cells regrow into the wound. And overall, stem cells allow us to regenerate in all of these tissues by continuing to divide and provide new cells. So, like I said, we have sort of a trade-off that we have to make in the human body between regeneration and avoiding cancer. But there's some animals in nature that have really figured this out and have a way more advanced ability to regenerate than we do. And if I'm going to talk about regenerative animals, I have to start with the planarian. And this is a tiny, about a half-inch long flatworm that lives in fresh water, and it's able to regenerate pretty much any part of its body because it's full of many more stem cells than we have, sort of ounce for ounce. And you can see this amazing ability in this video where someone has cut this planarian in half. This is actually how they reproduce. They divide themselves naturally. And both of these halves, you can see, survive and continue to swim along. And eventually, both halves will regrow the missing half so that you have two worms. So you can see here, the head half is starting to have this clear bundle of cells at the point where it was amputated, and these are stem cells rushing to that wound to start to divide and produce more cells in order to regrow the lost tissue. And you can see the same thing happening with the tail here. This clear bundle of cells, all of the stem cells recruited to the end of the body. And you can already see just 4 days later, we're starting to see the shape of the head take place, this triangular shape. And even you can start to see the eye spots. They're really visible at about 4 days. You can see these aren't true eyes, but they're light-sensitive spots that are on the top of the head. And you can see after a few more days, we're starting to see pigment come back. This starts out clear because the pigment-generating cells have just grown and haven't had a chance to actually fill the tissue with pigment yet. And then 5 days later, we're starting to see these little protrusions on the side of the head. This is one of their sensory organs. And then finally, 1 week later, this worm is just about back to normal. And you can see here, 1 week after this worm was cut in half, we have 2 genetically identical cloned worms that are both happy and healthy. So this is a really amazing ability that these planarians have, but it's hard to see how this would apply to humans because these are just so different from us. So we really want a model organism that is a lot more like a human. So for that, we turn to the axolotl. And you might think that this doesn't look very much like a human. But if you compare it to the planarian, it has a true face like we would think of it, 2 real eyes, a mouth, a nose. And what's really important is that it has limbs. And one of the things that we're really interested in medicine is being able to help people who have lost a limb regenerate in order to live their normal life. So the axolotl, like us, has 4 limbs, a shoulder, an elbow, even something that looks a little bit like our hand. So this is a really good model for us to think about how this might look in humans. Axolotls are actually really popular pets. They eat liver or insects in the wild, but we're really interested in them as a scientific model. So when you have an axolotl, you can, like the planarian, amputate this front forelimb, and over a matter of days and weeks, this won't just close over and heal with skin the way a human wound would. You can see after only a few days it's starting to grow out and form these finger-like protrusions. And after a couple of weeks, the limb is fully formed and just growing back to its normal size. This only takes a month for the axolotl to go from this amputation to a normal limb. And we're really not sure how they can do this. We have some guesses, but we don't know how we can translate this to humans yet. One of the things we found that's really important in this process are macrophages. These are the immune cell, the Pac-Man that I talked about before. And we know that if an axolotl doesn't have macrophages, it can't regenerate. And this is really exciting because if the macrophages are so important for regeneration, we have macrophages, and we could use our macrophages to maybe emulate the axolotl. So we don't know how our different cells are the same, how they're different, and how we can maybe manipulate our bodies to copy the axolotl. The other thing we know from both the planarian and the axolotl is that they have more and more powerful stem cells than we do. So one thing scientists are currently looking into is how do these stem cells differ between these regenerative animals and us, and how do they keep their stem cells under control so that they don't suffer from cancer, and how can we use these lessons in order to make humans more regenerative and more resilient to diseases like cancer. So just to sum up, we've seen in this second part of the talk that cell types like blood cells and skin cells will work together to heal a wound in the human body, and that other cells like macrophages and stem cells might be the key to regenerating entire limbs. Unfortunately, this isn't technology that we have yet, so Andy is going to talk about how we can help patients with limb loss and other issues using technology rather than nature.